President Biden blasted Republicans on Monday for opposing an increase or suspension of the nation's debt ceiling. The president warned GOP senators the country could be heading for an economic crisis if the debt limit is not addressed by October 18th. That is when the Treasury says the U.S. will run out of money to pay its bills. The president is also struggling to bring his own party together to pass key parts of his agenda. CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes has more.
Two people.
In a meeting this afternoon, the president asked progressives what they are willing to cut in order to secure support from the last two holdouts.
Look, I need 50 votes in the Senate. I have 48.
One of the two is West Virginia Democrat Joe Manchin, who wants to slash the president's Build Back Better plan from $3.5 trillion to $1.5 trillion.
What they should be doing looking at the needs that we have for our country.
He and Arizona Democrat Kyrsten Sinema were hounded by progressive protesters this weekend. They followed Sinema into an Arizona bathroom.
We need solutions to the Build Back Better plan.
And paddled up to Manchin's houseboat.
Let's tax the rich.
We're taxing the rich.
But the two aren't even President Biden's most pressing problem. The nation is set to hit its borrowing limit in just 2 weeks, and Republicans voted twice last week to default.
If you don't want to help save the country, get out of the way so you don't destroy it.
In a letter to President Biden today, Republican leader Mitch McConnell argued since your party wishes to govern alone, it must handle the debt limit alone as well. Mr. Biden warned that retirement accounts could start taking a hit this week if the markets get spooked by Senate gridlock.
Defaulting on the debt would lead to a self-inflicted wound that takes our economy over a cliff.
Nancy Cordes joins me now from the White House with more. Hi there, Nancy. So what will likely need to happen for the White House and Republicans to reach a deal on the debt ceiling? And are there any ongoing negotiations between the two sides to reach a compromise?
There are no negotiations right now, Elaine, and it's hard to see what they would negotiate about. Normally, when you're in a situation like this, you've got one side saying, we're not going to vote for X unless you give us Y. That's not the situation here. Republicans in the Senate are saying, we are not going to vote with you to raise the debt ceiling, period. They're not demanding anything. They're not seeking anything. They are simply saying that we feel Democrats should have to go it alone because they are working on big spending measures alone, even though we know, of course, that the debt ceiling needs to be raised to cover spending that has already taken place and authorized by both sides. So in that sense, there isn't much to negotiate about. This is really more of a standoff, if you will. And we are at that point in the standoff where both sides are talking about how much it's going to be the other side's fault if things go badly, and things could go really badly. If the nation's debt defaults, we could see rising interest rates. People's retirement accounts could take a hit. The nation's credit rating could go down, and on and on. And the tricky thing here is that we don't know exactly when some of these things would take place. The markets could start to get spooked well before we get to that October 18th deadline. So that's why the Senate's kind of playing with fire here in this standoff.
All right, so that is the debt ceiling issue. Pretty dire situation, as you laid out, economically speaking, potentially. Let's talk about the president's social spending plan. If that plan passes Congress, Nancy, it will likely be smaller than the current $3.5 trillion price tag. This is the plan to invest in things like childcare, healthcare, education, and fighting climate change. Nancy, what exactly is the White House willing to compromise on to get this bill passed? And how low is President Biden willing to go on the price tag?
So the president had that conversation with progressives in the House on Monday. He finally kind of came out and said this plan is going to have to be much smaller in order to get the support of Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, the two Senate Democratic holdouts. And while he didn't say exactly how much smaller it's going to have to be, he put progressives on the spot and said, tell me what your biggest priorities in this bill are so that I can fight to keep them in these negotiations with Sinema Sinema and Manchin. So, you know, in a way, it's kind of like a grab bag. Are you more willing to pare down the child care spending in the bill? Are you willing to pare down education or measures to fight climate change or paid family leave? Part of the challenge here is that no one seems to know exactly where Kyrsten Sinema is, what she could live with. We know that Joe Manchin says he wants a $1.5 trillion bill. That seems to be a huge non-starter with progressives. They say that's less than half of what the rest of them are willing to support. They argue that one or two Democrats shouldn't be able to slash the bill to that extent. But that's the situation right now, especially after a weekend where we really saw no major progress in the negotiations. Manchin and Sinema are holding a lot of the cards here, and so these negotiations continue.
Right. So also hanging in the balance is that bipartisan infrastructure bill, which addresses the nation's roads, bridges, and broadband, among other things. Was there any sense of headway made in that meeting with the president and House progressives?
The White House appears to be completely comfortable with the progressive strategy of holding off on a vote on that bipartisan infrastructure bill until they get a deal on the president's social spending plan, because they know that this infrastructure bill is very important to both Manchin and Sinema. They helped to craft it. They really want to get it passed. And the worry continues to be among progressives that if they do pass it, then there's really no incentive for Manchin and Sinema to continue negotiating over this other bill. You know, they're not really that interested in this other piece of legislation. So the only way to keep them engaged in negotiations is by using the bipartisan infrastructure plan as leverage. And so for right now, that's what the progressives in the party are going to continue to do.
Right, because you have this sort of back and forth with deadlines, right? Democrats keep setting, then moving back deadlines to get these bills passed. I mean, how concerned really, Nancy, is the White House that one or potentially both of these bills might not get passed at all?
Well, you know, the deadlines have to be imposed to force people to the table, but in reality, they could pass. These are optional pieces of legislation. They could be passed at any time. And so while it certainly makes the White House uncomfortable to have both of these pieces of legislation hanging out there, they know that the infrastructure bill has Democratic support, it has Republican support. It can probably pass at any time, frankly, in the next several months. So they're comfortable with this strategy for now, even though, of course, they would prefer for the president to be able to notch a win on that one and to be able to notch a win on his Build Back Better plan as well. But that big Build Back Better agenda is so important to him. It's so crucial to the White House strategy going into the midterm elections to be able to tout that they have passed a big bill that contains all of these priorities that, frankly, poll very well with the American public. They are willing to hold out, take the risk when it comes to infrastructure, let that hang out there just a little bit longer to see if they can clinch a deal on the big social spending bill.
All right, Nancy Cortez at the White House for us. Nancy, always good to have you. Thank you.
Thanks, Elaine.